All right, y'all, yesterday, or sorry, not yesterday, just in the previous video, however long ago it was that you watched that, we created this index.php file and we added in all this good stuff that allows us to connect to our database program, which is called MySQL, or MySQL is how it's pronounced in the industry. And so what we want to do now is we want to actually connect to a specific database and then access the tables within that database. So we're going to make some edits to our code here. Primarily, we want to add another variable called db name. And we're going to set that equal to C9. Oops. Make sure it's in quotes. C9, complete statement, end with a semicolon. And then down here, after our password, we're going to provide db name. So this is the four variables that MySQLi takes, or the four parameters that MySQLi takes. Again, we could have hard-coded these in here, but we always want to use variable names in case we create new MySQLis in other places within our code. Cool. So our connection, create connection is still the same. The check connection is still the same. One thing we want to do is comment out this echo connected successfully because we know it's working. So what we want to do is we want to actually get table records. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Now there's some advanced things we're going to talk about in a second. First off, let's go ahead and let's talk about SQL language, SQL. SQL stands for Sequential Query Language, and it looks like this here. Here's a SQL statement. So I have, go away. So I have selected star, which means all fields or all columns from the people table, and I've limited the count from 0 to 30. So if I wanted to do this myself, I could actually enter, oops, wants me to log in again. All right, I'll log in. I'll play your game, computer. All right, so I'm going to click on SQL, and I can actually create my own SQL statements. So I'm going to select, retrieve. Let's retrieve just first name and last name from people. Let's see what that does. So end of the SQL statement, when we type it into the query, we have to end it with a semicolon. So go ahead and click on go. Boo! There it is. First name and last name. Now I can edit my statement here. And instead of first name, last name, I can get rid of that and use the star, which is everything. Update. Oh, I did not want to do that. Click go. And now it retrieved everything. Jason Cooksey, my favorite color, and the ID. First name, last name, favorite color, and ID. So that's what SQL statements look like, and they get way more complicated. Like as we get further into this, we actually in our advanced class we may not get into some of the more advanced SQL stuff. It's just important to understand that databases exist and how we can connect and communicate with them. But you can actually have multiple tables in here and connect them. Like let's say we have a table that's just customer names, their account number, and maybe their contact information, and then they have an ID. And then we can have another table that has all of the transactions for all of our customers. It just has like a value of the transaction and then the ID of the customer who did the transaction. And that saves us some time because if you had, let's say, 50,000 transactions, you wouldn't want to store the customer's name and address and account number and contact information for every single transaction that they did. You'd only want to store it in one place and then just have an ID or a key that could tie those two tables together or join them together. And the SQL can do that. But that's a little more advanced than we may be getting into. Okay, so at any rate, we're going to come back over here, and we're going to provide that same SQL, that same select statement to our connection, to our CONN object. And we're going to set it inside of a variable first, and we're going to call that variable SQL. Now you could call it Bob if you want to, but again, we want to name things what they are, and so if we're having to come back and look at our code, seeing the SQL as the variable name is going to make a lot more sense to us than Bob. So a SQL select statement is a string, so we're going to type select. Let's do first name, comma, last name, comma, fave color, and we're going to say from people. Cool. Now, we do not put a semicolon inside of this select statement. It used to be required, but it works without it, so I don't worry about it. So I'm going to leave it out for right now. If we get an error, we'll come back and throw it in there. Remember, when you're working with PHP and MySQL, that various servers, run different versions of PHP and MySQL, and sometimes you get weird inconsistencies like that, so you got to accommodate for that. And that's probably one of the most frustrating things about programming, is that stuff changes, nomenclature changes, functions change, execution changes. It's kind of maddening, actually. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to access our database, our table, through that connection, and we're going to store the results, interestingly enough, inside this variable called result. So I'm going to, within the CONN object, I'm going to point to the query method, and I'm going to provide it a parameter that contains our SQL statement. So it's going to run that SQL statement. I could have hard-coded this within the parentheses there, but that's kind of a bad way of doing things. Okay, so here's where things get really complicated. I'm gonna type this code in. I'm gonna say minimal explanation, and then I'm gonna come back and talk about it a little bit. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is a conditional, and we're gonna say if this result, which is an object itself, has a property of num rows that's greater than 0, which means it found rows, then we're going to execute the code. And so inside here, we're going to output data of each row. Cool? All right, now, while this statement equates to true, execute this code. And this code is going to be to echo out the row, and because it's an associative array, we're going to show the first name, and then we're going to append that with a space, and then concatenate the next thing, which is row last name, concatenate, and we're going to do comma, favorite color dot row fave color. And then it's a complete statement, so end it with a semicolon. Okay, oh, probably we should add a break onto this here, so we break these lines up. There we go, break tag, break it down. All right, let's save that. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening here. So the result object, which is which grabs its value from this query that we run inside of the connection, if there are rows, more than 0 rows of results, that means that it went to the database and it found more than 0 rows. So right here we found 2 rows. See, it says 2 total. If it found more than 0 rows, then go ahead and execute this code here. So the output is going to exist inside of this while statement. And while is just like an if statement. It's a conditional, and it evaluates truth or false. Anytime we use a single equals, it's always going to be true. So you might look at this and be like, okay, this while is going to keep running over and over and over again until the result of the fetch brings up nothing. Every time you do a fetch association, it sets the pointer inside of the results to the next row. So right now, the first time through, it looks at row 0, which is, if you remember from JavaScript, from our arrays, 0 is the first index, and it grabs the associative array of objects and puts them inside of the row. And row becomes an associative array, which we can access through the array names. First name, last name, favorite color. It knows what those are because it associated them based on how it retrieved the data from the database, which is all kinds of code stuff going on in the background there, which is really good to know about, but for right now, it's not super necessary. Okay, so just understand that it's going to iterate through every row of results until it runs out of rows, and every time it runs through one row, it's going to allow us to access that row's information. Now again, we could call this Bob, we can call this Larry, it does not matter, but naming these variable names based on what they represent or what they contain is super helpful. Okay, now what if there's no rows? What if this result brings up nothing? So we have to accommodate for that. So we're going to say else, so if else, we're going to echo out no results. Okay, and then now this is important. Because we have connected to the database and retrieved data, we need to close that connection. So we're going to access the close method inside of the connect object. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up this page and refresh, and we should get some names. Ah, no results. So, what did we do wrong? Ah, curses. All right, so the error ended up being here, num rows. Save that and refresh, and there's our results. Yay! All right, cool.